See whose computer says it's good to go first.
Hey, good morning, everyone. How are we doing? It's the 11th day. That's crazy. I can't believe we've been doing this for 11 days. Starting with this one, and then we have a break slash networking session, and then we have another 3, but don't worry, those last 3 are spread out a little bit more, so you'll have a lot more breaks in between those 3 sessions. So yeah, buckle up. It's going to be fun. Stay hydrated, stretch throughout the day, get comfy. Super excited for today.
Awesome. So what we're about to jump into is the branding protest session. This was a brainchild of Keisha, who's here with us hosting today. She was also in charge of organizing the panel yesterday morning on regenerative future. So super big thanks to Keisha for doing that. She, in her bio, she says she's personally focused on supporting systemic social change through creative culture and on building and engaging communities, which is just totally what she's done for us in this party program, helping us bring together these amazing panels. So huge thanks. It's been a real passion project and labor of love, I know. And it's like, you know, we've been really trying to get a wide perspective of voices here, and Keisha really brings in people from Europe and people way outside of our network that we wouldn't have been able to reach, and some really amazing people too. So I'm super excited for today. So what we're going to be talking about, we've seen a lot of protests in the news on social media in our cities over just the last year, especially here in the US, but really everywhere. Whether it's Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, or others, if you think about these moments in your mind, if you just like think back to the protest moments that we've seen, I'm sure that visuals come up for you. If you think about, you know, what you see on the news, the banners, the signs, the matching T-shirts, that's branding. And so with us today is an amazing panel of people focused on exactly that, the idea that protests are branded. So I'm sure Keisha will do intros as well, but just to give you all a little bit of context, Keisha's joined us from Future Factor. Again, we met Carrie yesterday. They are working together. And our other panelists today are super impressive. Keisha's gathered Sabiha Basrai, art director from Design Action Collective, I loved this part in her bio when I looked her up. She's focused her academic career on the history of anti-war poster art and visual strategies for social justice organizing. And then we have the amazing Charlie Waterhouse, who is creative director of This Ain't Rock and Roll, and maybe not single-handedly, but responsible for the naming and identity of Extinction Rebellion. And then we have Klaus Kempenaar, who literally wrote the book, one of the co-authors of Branded Protest, which is a publication about the power of branding and its influence on protest movements. So I'm super excited about this session. We have some very knowledgeable and experienced people to talk to us about it today, and I am going to get out of your hair and let you get started. So everyone give a big round of virtual applause. We can hear it in our minds' ears for this session today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session, Designing Protest, here at the Climate Designers Party program. And a huge thank you to Sarah and Mark for having us from Climate Designers. My name is Keisha Benvenuto, and my background is in advertising. I spent the first decade and a half of my career working at creative agencies like TBWA, Chiat Day LA, and Wieden & Kennedy, and producing global work for iconic brands, Sony PlayStation, Coca-Cola, and Nike. Then I moved from advertising into creating communities around art and design for Facebook Creative Labs, and eventually began doing programming, curation, and community engagement work for cultural institutions and nonprofits. I'm currently the Connections Director at international PR firm Future Factor, and I also work with the Verbier Art Summit, a global think tank whose mission is art for social change. As a human, I'm very passionate about the ways in which art, design, and contemporary culture can galvanize communities for social change, which is why I created this session on the role of branding for protest, with the help of design partners Klaus Kempenaar and Ingeborg Bloom, who are co-authors of the recently published book, Branded Protest. Klaus is here today, along with designers Sabiha Basrai and Charlie Waterhouse. I thought it would be a nice way to start to have Sabiha and Charlie introduce themselves and their work. And before I have them do that, I just want to remind you that the question and chat icons on the far right are there. Please use them and please submit your questions. We'll do the introductions, we'll have our discussion, and then we'll take questions from you, the audience. So Sabiha, welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. I'm glad to share space with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just take maybe about 5 minutes to share a little bit about the way Design Action, our approach to this work. So Design Action Collective is a worker-owned cooperative. We were founded as a spinoff of Inkworks Press, which was a print shop, also worker-owned, founded in Berkeley, California in the 70s, at a time when having activists and organizers own the presses was really critical to our movements being able to use media. And over the years, Inkworks Press, was a shop that was made up of a lot of women, people of color, folks who were underrepresented in that industry, run democratically, had political points of unity, and unionized, which is very much how Design Action is still modeled. Two members of Inkworks Press moved on to create this shop. We have grown to 11 people and continue to do organizing inside and outside of our, quote, office. And when I think about why I do this work, I have to think about what we're up against as graphic designers, as media makers. We live in a world where companies like Wells Fargo and Chevron get to pretend that they are the champions of working class people of color in this country, which we know is bullshit. And our stories and our struggles are often co-opted and sold back to us in the form of major label clothing, or in this case, Pepsi stopping police brutality. And even when our stories and our struggles are captured in Hollywood films or high school history books, they're often stripped of these mass movements that made them and simplified down into one singular figurehead, which really does keep with that culture of celebrity. But who better than us to tell our own stories? And so when Design Action Collective had the opportunity to work on the Black Lives Matter logo, it all came about because Patrice, Opal, and Alicia, who were the founders of #Black Lives Matter, had worked with members of Design Action Collective over the years. We had built trust together over the years. And when this hashtag popped off, they knew that they could come to us and collaborate on a rapid response image that could help tie together all the conversations that were happening nationally in the form of, an easy to share social media graphic. And our, friends at Inkworks Press printed these posters pretty much overnight and distributed them, made them free for download so others could print them as well. And over time, we saw this kind of graphic evolve. Organizations and movement activists who were involved in this moment, maybe from a perspective of being an ally. In the case of Asians for Black Lives, this was something that allowed those of us who have experienced the benefits of the model minority narrative in the United States, implicating us in white supremacy, really rejecting that and building this affinity work around Asians for Black Lives, but again, keeping the same black and yellow. And, in the hands of a leaderful movement, the visual elements continued to expand. Anti-imperialist organizations took up the same color palette in order to tie together the relationship between border policing, police brutality, prisons, and the legacy of white supremacy, not just in the United States, but internationally. And more recently, with the last year of protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder, this crystallization around defunding the police or abolishing the police at the national level also, manifested in street murals that still used that gold color. One other case study I wanted to share was when the first Muslim ban was announced by the Trump administration back in 2017. Design Action created this poster after working with immigrant rights organizations that understood the need to tie together the issue of resisting a Muslim ban with resisting the militarization of the southern border and demanding sanctuary for all people. So forcing any media coverage of the protests at the airports to be looking at that intersection and making sure we would not let any of our communities be divided by a good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative. And seeing that an image like that was easy to replicate by others who came to the airports the following days, making their own version of that poster, really helped reinforce that story. And lastly, I think some of you may have attended David Solnit's session yesterday. He was part of a team of artists that came up with this sunflower metaphor for climate justice. This is an image from Detroit in 2010, where we did a direct action at the garbage incinerator, which was later closed. And again, looking at this idea of just transitions, rejecting the idea that it's kind of jobs versus the environment, and using the sunflower as a symbol that has continued to be repeated over and over again in climate justice work. This is an image Design Action created for a protest that lifted up solidarity to solutions and stories of Indigenous people, the most impacted people, leading the solutions to climate justice, and disrupting the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco a few years ago that was really led by just kind of corporate capitalist work masquerading as climate work. Again, centering the voices of the most impacted communities. And so I'll just end by reminding all of us to embrace our role as agents of resistance as something that's part of our lifelong practice. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sabiha. I love that the color gold and that gold and black together have woven through all those connected campaigns. Charlie, I'd love to hear from you and see the work that you've been doing with This Ain't Rock and Roll along with Clive Russell on Extinction Rebellion.
Thanks, Keisha, and thanks, Sabiha. That was really good. Hopefully that's now worked. Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to give you a whistle stop 3 minutes, I think, on the last few years of This Ain't Rock and Roll's creative practice. We sort of say that we work at the intersection of culture and causes, and I think are firm believers in that kind of romantic idea that creativity is essential for change. And that, as the poet John Keats identified in his theory of negative capability, that there's truth in beauty and beauty in truth. For many years, I think probably our best known work was with the Brixton Pound, the local currency that circulates in this part of London where I'm speaking from. And in some ways, it was an initiative ahead of its time in terms of sort of environmental related design. In 2016, though, we expanded the work that we'd been doing with the Brixton Pound and created a nation state of mind, a thing called Brixtopia, which was all about exploring what it means to belong and this was in Britain. This was also in the immediate post-Brexit context. We started running creative happenings in places like Tate Modern and the V&A. We worked with our friends Body Politic and got involved in making and upcycling and exploring ideas of participatory activism. At the same time, we were invited to be part of the Design Museum here in London. They had a political design retrospective called Hope to Nope. Whilst that was going on, we were also getting involved in a new direct action campaign. It was called Stop Killing Londoners, and it was about protesting against air pollution in the capital. Roads were blocked, buildings defaced, tactics were being trialled about how to cause disruption, how to get press, how to get arrested. And whilst we were doing that, the Design Museum went and hosted an arms manufacturer whilst our show was on. So a bunch of us got together and we all took the work out en masse from the exhibition and then put the show back on in the Recreation Centre in Brixton for free, with loads of extra work from people like Occupy, the Guerrilla Girls, and Tanya Bruguera. And it was at this show that the world got its kind of, well, I say the world, the people that turned up got their first glimpse of an as yet unlaunched movement that a few of us had been kind of working on the creative for. And that was Extinction Rebellion. And from the very beginning, art, design, and creativity have been absolutely central to XR. We knew from the start that we'd need a visual presence that could cope with diverse support. The climate emergency is kind of so complicated and so much bigger than a single issue subject. And we knew that that creativity would help mark out XR as being different to what had come before, but also that it would allow us to be really efficient in communicating our intentions in often really confrontational circumstances. This is Phil. He's 83. He's glued to the top of a metro train in London, and our colour, our type, and the symbol. The hourglass symbol are a shortcut that really have helped us cut through a really crowded and opinionated landscape, and the design works incredibly hard for the movement. It also helps XR sort of wage its battle on many fronts. It makes it much harder for the authorities to dismiss us as extremists or worse. And just today in Britain, the Conservative government is announcing how they're going to kind of up the penalties for protest, and that's in direct reaction to both XR and Black Lives Matter protests over the last few years. So the stakes are getting ever higher here in London, as they are in many places around the world. And the design has allowed the XR presence to be felt right across the world. In 2 years, it's sprung up in 96 countries on 6 continents, and its kind of distinctive approach to disruption has been responsible, along with many others. I mean, it's not just XR, Greta and the school strikers, but it's certainly contributed to that shift in public awareness and opinion. Traditional kind of NGOs in the climate space have been totally unable to achieve. And I think the key really is in designing a program that was totally simple and then giving it away at the earliest opportunity has helped XR make a movement where everyone is welcome and everyone has the space and ability to see themselves as part of that. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. God, 96 countries in 2 years. That's really impressive. I know I'm a member of the Amsterdam chapter here, and I think we have like 5 different chapters in the Netherlands. So that's amazing.
Yeah, the Dutch chapters are amazing. really good graphic design, as you'd expect.
Well, Klaus, you are a Dutch graphic designer. Speaking of, and you and Ingeborg, your design partner, have written Branded Protests, and it's amazing. You researched 13 different protest movements, maybe more, contemporary protest movements, and your background is in design and in branding. I'm curious to know, what do you think protest movements are successfully borrowing from branding, and what would you say they should absolutely steer clear of?
Well, in the end, it is an impromptu action, right? And that will benefit from the grassroots energy it has. But to avoid fatigue and in the long run, it will require coordination and strategy. And here, the ideas of branding are playing a role to create the most effective tools possible. But it is using branding responsibly with the right balance. But if you do that, you can keep the message intact and you can strengthen solidarity. In the long run, people will feel the need to unite around a flexible framework in order to make it their own and to give an individual space to express themselves within that group. The designer in that sense can help to build a frame, to formulate and clarifying simple message. And in the end, it is a group of people. So you're collaborating on ideas, on approaches to contribute to the movement. It is really about bringing those together who are moved by similar reasons and desires and goals. And I think in that sense, it is really about listening and paying attention to the story of the cause and to look for effective solutions for driving participation. And then in the end, creating empowering content to connect with people. And that really is the longevity of movements.
Sabiha, I know that for you, the word branding has a lot of negative connotations as well. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that and as a designer.
Yeah, I came up as an activist in the late 2000s, in the early 2000s. Right when I was in high school, the 1999 WTO protest happened, which really politicized me around doing anti-globalization work and understanding the role of corporations, multinational corporations, in marketing a narrative about what their company was, and knowing that field that was basically about lying about what a company actually is. And so, being politicized by the Adbusters kind of era of design activism, branding was always kind of a dirty word to me. And what I've learned over the years is really thinking about the tools we use in the context of narrative strategy, which I see has a lot of overlap with the way that some people use the word brand. But when we think about it in the terms of narrative strategy, we can really address what is the dominant narrative that we are trying to reframe. And so for Design Action, for me, as a Muslim woman who had a lot of experience doing anti-war work in the post 9/11 environment in the United States, I understood that there was this narrative that I was in competition with, and I had to figure out creative ways to have interventions in that narrative that allowed a new story to be told. And design tools, there's so many design tools we can use in order to be effective in that way, but it has to come from a strategic planning perspective, not just, it wasn't enough that I was feeling personally compelled to create something. I had to be doing it in coordinated effort with an analysis around what those narratives are and what new narratives were possible.
And I think that's really interesting to talk about it from that context, seeing the similarities, but also being really careful to not, let's say, fall into that category of branding. And Charlie, you have your own design agency, and you've worked with, you like me have worked in the past in advertising for brands. What's your take on this concept of branding for protest?
Well, I mean, I similarly have an issue with the word brand. I think that's part of. I think the world would be a lot better if we didn't use it at all. The connotations of what has been done with a hot iron to both animals and people in the past speaks to me of the patriarchy and of hierarchical practices, and I think in the design industry generally, it's not good enough anymore to just think that you're not part of the problem, so therefore you must be part of the solution. If you're not actually actively doing something, then you are part of the problem. So I've got a bit of a problem with, but understand that it's also part of there is a stock reaction to that, so people understand what is meant by that. We like to talk of, at the risk of sounding hopelessly pretentious, we like to talk of presence, and I think something having presence is much more enabling than this kind of compliance, top-down compliance to brand. So yeah, it's nice to finally be in a position in one's career where you can kind of work in those sorts of spaces. It takes a while to wake up and realize.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and it's something that comes to my mind instantly, is that idea that, you know, brands are top down, and the work that you're both doing and that Klaus was talking about in the book is very much about doing something and then giving it away. And it's very much people actually involved in the movements who are making the designs and then asking that people make them their own, which is, of course, not at all what a brand like Nike or anyone who has a very, you know, they have a very protected mark, and it's not for appropriation and reuse. And actually, I think that's interesting because your work has been appropriated and reused by people who you would not want to have it, to reuse it and appropriate it. Maybe you can both talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, do you want to take that?
Sure, I could start. Well, just looking at the Black Lives Matter image, we saw really quickly how the kind of white supremacist backlash to the statement was quickly, you know, raised as, oh, all lives matter. And I was really impressed with the way that the three Black women who had first kind of coined this term and were helping support national organizing around that kind of banner really were very clear about maintaining, no, we're centering Black Lives Matter, and exposing why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter meant your white supremacy was showing. Like it very now, you know, because of organizing work, because of relentless organizing work by Black leadership in this country, in the United States, that has been pushed back on effectively. And now anybody who claims that they are, you know, or tries to use that term, all lives matter, is it clearly shows like, oh, you're actually somebody who doesn't want to support the issue of Black, the protesting of the criminalization of Black people. And so, and on the other extreme, we saw even, you know, the right-wing response of Blue Lives Matter. And these things are kind of, are interesting to track. And it's not, for me and at Design Action Collective, we haven't really seen it as our role to maintain and kind of police a brand. It is, our role is to be useful to the folks who are leading these movements. And sometimes we are from that same community, and sometimes we're not. And especially in the case where we are not from a most impacted community, we defer to the leadership of who's kind of on the ground doing this work, and what do they need from their political creative partners. And so, you know, we saw them do the work to maintain this demand and created graphics as needed. And again, in a leaderful movement, others were also creating graphics that moved that forward.
I really like that phrase, leaderful movement, and I'd love to come back to that in a minute. But Charlie, I wanted to have you talk about this idea of appropriation by big business or by brands of the work that Extinction Rebellion has been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was amazed at how quickly we were being contacted by trend forecasters, you know, kind of wanting to talk about, you know, oh yeah, your work's amazing, and like, you know, we're really wanting to know what the trends are for like next year, and we're like, the trends for next year is the world is ending unless you pull your finger out and do something about it. I mean, honestly, good God. But yeah, we gave the work away as soon as we created it, and that's been key. I mean, you saw that last picture in that presentation, the kids in Palestine, you know, holding up the placards. I mean, that's what this was all about. Was about saying, okay, here's something. Who wants to run with it? But it does mean that. I mean, we have done. I think at the last count. I mean, we gave up counting a while ago, but. We've had to do in excess of 900 takedown demands on Etsy and Amazon, and you know, you're up against, you know, the big data just doesn't care. The internet just doesn't care. So we're having to take all that down. So we're in this strange position of giving it away, but also like stopping people using it, and that's precisely because you know, the industry, business as usual, will try and co-opt you, will try and make you acceptable, will try and make you look like you're not as, you know, not as dangerous as you should be. And it's all part of the fight back. It happened. You saw it in 1968 in Paris. By the end of that summer, you could buy the catalog and you could wear the merch. And it's like, oh yeah, look at me. I've got a Che Guevara t-shirt. Aren't I cool? And it takes the sting out of things. So I think one of our jobs in XR is to, yeah, sure, if people want to make a t-shirt with a symbol on it, that's absolutely fine. But we're going to carry on being as badly behaved as possible to make sure that people remember that this is not a joke and this is not a marketing opportunity. But it's tough.
Yeah, I love it. Buy the merch. Klaus, what kinds of examples did you come across from other movements? And also, I know you mentioned something about, you know, the pink hats for the Women's March, and how in a way that was kind of something that maybe took a turn that people weren't so excited about.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is one of those things, right? Like you have very little control when you do these kind of protests, and then a lot of people are giving ideas and come together in that sense, but there is very little control over it in the end. Branding can obviously, you know, the tools can get some sort of structure in there, but it is an open field. And by the Women's March, they came up with like, or these two women in California, they came up with this hat, the pussy hat, so to say, and that became quite a spectacular icon. And when you were at the march in DC and also other marches all over the world, this hat became really a huge pink color in the masses that were demonstrating. I think in the end, when you know, when you look at a long-term effect, there was a lot of discussion about that within the group, and I think you probably won't see that the pink pussy hat anymore, because it has really had a lot of problems within the movement. But I also would like to, I don't know, I would also like to talk about like the, you know, the within other demonstrations and protest, what can be done and how it can be done. This is like an interesting part with the March for Science, where we had like the opportunity to talk to Becca Ekonopoulos and her husband Jason Jones, and they are like an activist couple, already involved in a lot of different movements. Also, for example, in the Occupy Wall Street movement, and then the March for Science. They started this project called the Natural History Museum, and it was really like about to affirm the truth of science by looking at the presentation of natural history in museums, the told and untold stories in these institutions, and really like look at that point, because that is an educational environment. And so they founded this museum, and they joined the Association of the Science Museum Directors. With that in mind, they were able to get invited at these History Museum member retreats. And so when they went to these retreats, they were able to establish a relationship with these people, these decision makers. They could infiltrate, they could instigate a dialogue with them to drive change. And that was really like, and they called it like the Trojan horse strategy, to get into the museum sector and to try to transform it within. They actually called this work building a language in common, and which is very different from the corporate logic of the control of language. So that was, for me, was very interesting to see how with different kinds of method you can try to drive change.
It's great that they did it in that way. Yeah, that they, as you said, infiltrated and got straight to the source, because I agree that's a huge issue. The way information is portrayed in museums and just the kind of continual colonialist ideologies around art and around natural history. And so that's fascinating. That's a great example. Charlie, going back to this phrase leaderful movement, and then I've also heard XR described as a leaderless movement. And in a way, I think you guys are actually talking about the same thing in some ways, but I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And Charlie, so you've described XR as a do-it-together movement. Can you expand on that, and can you talk a little bit about the leaderless moniker?
Yeah, sure. I've got almost as big a problem with leaderless as I have with branding, and I think, and for me, this is the importance of language, and in that brilliant way that because Black Lives Matter was so well named, when someone says all lives matter, you immediately know they're a jerk, right? And that's the power of creativity, and so and the power of words. When people say leaderless, they're trying. It's the old thing that's always been thrown at the anarchists, is that anarchy equals chaos, whereas actually anarchy just means no respect for organized authority and the power of autonomous action and things like that. But it's leaderless. It's terrifying, and that's immediately the way that XR got described, and it's probably the way that a lot of people in the movement think of it as well. But actually, we need lots of leaders, and the movement is full of lots of leaders, as is Black Lives Matter, as are most protest movements, and that was. That's the same as the idea of do it together, and that's manifested in a couple of ways with XR. One, from the design and art point of view, is art workshops, our protests always have some element of art on there. You can make prints, you can work with clothing, and it's about getting people to do sort of mindful tasks together. And it's amazing how quick, but you do that for half an hour, and all of a sudden you've got friends that you feel like you've known for ages, and you know that you've got their back, and vice versa. And it's an amazing way of breaking down those barriers. But also the idea of the thing that we always encourage people to do is don't walk into this climate thing on your own, because it's heavy, and there are plenty of rabbit holes to go down. There's plenty of really depressing stuff. So absolutely do not do that on your own. You do it with other people, because then you've got someone who's got your back, someone that you can get some perspective with, and someone you can maybe sometimes even have a laugh with as well. And that's absolutely key. So do these things with other people, because that's about building, it's about building trust. It's about building resilience. It is on one really simple level, just not about not being on your own. And that's really, really important, because that business as usual world wants us to be individual. It wants us to be, this idea that you're defined by exactly who you are. It's like that's keeping us in our silos and stopping us from talking to each other, and stopping us from kind of getting out and acting together.
Yeah. I love that. I love what you're saying about the act of making with other people and the closeness that creates. It's so true. And Sabiha, so you're using Leaderful in your description of the movement. And I also know that you talk a lot about making sure that the people who are most impacted, that their voices are heard, and that in a way they're allowed to lead the charge. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really appreciate, Charlie, your hot take on Leaderful. I can relate to a lot of that. And I think for me, coming from an anti-capitalist mindset, being able to make sure that we're not seeing leadership as inherently bad, but also knowing that in historically traditional hierarchical systems, there's so much erasure of the people whose stories, the people who own their stories are like it's extracted, it's taken away. And so how can we be doing leadership development and celebrating our leaders as a way to recenter the narratives on the people who are most impacted, and listening to each other around solutions. So as new folks are like newly politicized around an issue of, say, climate change, instead of thinking like, oh, this is what I want to do on this issue, to really take a step back and ask, what have generations of other communities been doing already on this issue, and where can I support? How am I useful? What role can I play? And that's a lot of the kind of thing I talk about with design students, especially because coming out of a academic space and wanting to make a career as a graphic designer and work at the intersection of social justice and design is something that I'm really excited to encourage folks to do. It's what I pursued in my own career, but it also means making sure we're not bringing any hubris or assumptions into what it is that we should be doing and how we should be operating in those spaces. And so like Charlie, like Design Action Collective tries to create space for people to come and learn together, to train each other on how to make art and use the process of creating imagery as a way to build community power and develop new leaders. And so that when we're in the streets together, we recognize each other, we can take care of each other, keep each other safe, and feel united by signaling to one another that by carrying the same kind of colors or banners or imagery or messages, that we are united, even though maybe our lived experiences may be different. So that, I think, is really the power of like recognizing leadership development in a way that's not traditionally patriarchal and capitalist and hierarchical and oppressive, inherently oppressive.
That's beautiful.
And I'll add also that Design Action Collective is a worker-owned cooperative precisely because of that goal. Is is really turning the traditional agency on its head and being a shop where everybody who works at Design Action has a democratic voice in how we run our business. And we do a lot of types of projects, from websites to books to identity for nonprofits, but doing direct action art making is a real, important part of the heart and soul of Design Action Collective, but it's not all we do. And building in kind of sustainable work life for folks who are underrepresented in our industry is really important. And that does mean leadership development is part of that in order to be, fully engaged as both a maker and as a decision maker for this project.
Yeah, that's so important. I love that Design Action Collective is organized that way and that you focus on leadership development. I'm curious, because so it's an agency, right, in its way, or it's a collective. But I mean, you're doing this work. Do you have like titles like strategist and designer, and is it a similar? Is it broken down into similar kinds of roles, or?
Yeah, we used to not have any distinction. And actually, I remember editing my bio for you to be like, I'm a member of Design Action. I'm not an art director. But when we first started, we all had the same job role. We all did everything. And over time, especially as we've grown and expanded our services, we have needed to specialize more, and specialization requires some hierarchy of workflow, right? If you are building a website, there's kind of a project manager and the folks bottom lining the information architecture and design side. There's folks who are doing the development, and the back end build. And not everyone can have the same title, and not everyone can have the same role. There needs to be a flow. So making sure that as we've specialized over time, and hired in folks who maybe don't do everything, but do like a very specific critical piece of a larger process, we still maintain a flat decision-making process when it comes to running this small business. So questions about who to work for, what kinds of projects we want to be doing, where we want to be developing our skills, who we want to hire, how much we pay ourselves. All of those things are democratic decisions. And regardless of how long someone has worked at Design Action, I've been part of the shop for about a little over 14 years now. Wow. And our newest folks are like a few months in. We're all still having this flat system of communication. And we're trying to undermine the inherent systems of oppression that we have to unlearn, that all of us have to keep unlearning when it comes to patriarchy and white supremacy and trans misogyny and all of these things that we try and reject by having a flat structure. But just because you say that you want an equal voice in everything, that doesn't mean that it's equitable. And having an analysis of the way systems of oppression show up, even in our best intentioned social justice design collective, is like a required practice on a regular basis. So that's something that I would invite all of you here to really look at, like as you work with each other, to not just think about, well, what the product I'm creating, but how am I modeling these social justice values in the way that we work with one another.
That is fascinating. That's such great advice. It's a great model, and what I love too is that you're able to make a living doing what you love in the way that meets your personal values. And not many people are able to say that. I feel like design and advertising and working in these creative industries, it has always been a choice between, am I going to do work that pays me a sustainable wage that maybe I don't entirely agree with who I'm doing it for, or what the final outcome is, but I can feed my family versus doing what I love. And I feel like art's always sold that art, like a career in the arts and in design is always sold to young people as like, well, you have to be a starving artist, and it's so unfair to creative culture and just, to keep giving that idea. Charlie, I know you have a lot to say on this subject as well, and you have your own agency. I mean, I feel like that's a dream for so many creatives, is to be able to have their own agency and be in charge of the work that they do. And so how are you able to do that at This Ain't Rock and Roll?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, that thing about the idea that you have to be a starving artist or that you can't do decent work is totally perpetuated by that kind of big agency system as well, where you have that roster of clients where you might be every so often you're kind of allowed to work on the decent work. You get to like sort of do the thing that might solve a disease or might result in some kind of sort of social advancement. But then in the afternoon, you're back to working for the car client, the airline client, the airport client, the arms manufacturer, and that whole system is just appalling. And then coupled with that, the idea of free pitching as well, where the big agencies are able to soak that up and they're able to have departments that free pitch or do pro bono work for causes and charities, which means that the smaller guys don't get to do that because you can't afford to do that. And that was one of the best decisions that we ever made at this Ain't Rock and Roll, was that we were never going to free pitch again. And if we were going to work for free, and we do that for pretty much half of our time, we're going to decide who we do the work for. We're not going to be told that we have to work for free on the off chance that we might get some reward. This carrot that's constantly dangled is total. It's totally ridiculous. So yeah, running your own shop, it does give you that freedom, absolutely, and it means that you can get nicely distracted as well. You can sort of follow the kind of weird paths, which is great, and that helps as well because you get perspective. Yeah.
Klaus, so you also have your own agency, you and Ingeborg, and I'm actually curious. This book must have been is clearly a huge journey for you guys, and it's not necessarily what you were setting out to do when you first came across the idea. Has the book changed your design business? And also I love the way you guys are organized, because you're in New York and Ingeborg is in Amsterdam. So and you make that work, which is fantastic.
Yeah, well, it's also a very long story, obviously, because I'm not the youngest anymore. I started out like in the 80s with agency work, and I was really working a lot for, in that point I was in Holland working in one of the better design agencies for governmental work, because the government in Holland is doing a lot of design. And I think that was already kind of interesting because you work for the public, so it's a different way of working for a corporation. But then I did also work in that hemisphere, and I worked for like Swatch and those kind of guys. But when we started our business, it was kind of like a mom and pop shop, but it was a little interesting in the sense that we experimented with the new technology. So we were able to work in New York and in Amsterdam, and had sort of like a 24-hour design agency, like switching over ideas. It like the famous old modem system. So it was a kind of a
I can hear it now.
Yeah, it was always like 5 megabytes. We're like, okay, let's do that overnight, and then you got up the next day, and then it was like, oh damn, the modem shut down, and you had to do the whole thing again. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting time, and but we stayed together, and we still working together as to this very day. And I moved then really strongly in the art scene. So I had like that background. I had that background for a very, very long time. But then I was really working for art galleries and for artists. And then you have definitely a different perspective on design, because yes.
I'm sorry, forgive me. I just saw the time, and we actually have to wrap, and I don't want to, if there's like any question in the audience or anything like that. I mean, we don't have any questions, so that's fine. But I do want to ask, well, first of all, in wrapping up, I want to thank you all so much for being a part of this discussion. I feel like we could go on for another hour and just talk about all of these really important principles behind design and social change and art and creativity. I want to make sure that I give a shout out to your book, Klaus, Branded Protest, and maybe in the chat you could put a link of where people can get your book, because I think that's really important. And I guess I wanted to close with, I don't know, I had a couple of questions I wanted to close with, but I guess I'd like to ask this. Do you as a collective think that brands in this moment have a role and a responsibility towards social change? And if so, what could they do that would feel non-appropriating and respectful? Like what's the role of a brand right now in these important movements?
I'll have a go.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're a commercial brand, then your responsibility is to shut down. And if you're
stop making stuff.
And if you're a creative and if you're a designer, your responsibility is to behave like industry did in the Second World War, and to use your communicative skills to start addressing these incredibly pressing issues, whether it's Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, Me Too, whatever. Let's just get over ourselves, get everything working if we can, and then maybe we can return to whatever version of normal. But that's the responsibility.
I love that.
Yeah, the stakes are too damn high for us to be settling or compromising right now.
Yeah, it's for sure. It's like a time. I think it's actually a perfect time right now, because we have a global pandemic, and I think this is the perfect time to really switch, buttons and rethink the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to reset. We absolutely do. This is a perfect moment for it. Well, it's 7:00 here, 1:00 in Oakland, and what is it?
Actually, 1:00 in New York.
It's 1:00 in New York and 10:00 in
Perfect timing.
6:00 in London. So we're all. But thank you so much, everybody. It's been such a pleasure to talk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to hurry and end this session and get us into our next session. We do have a networking session in 2 hours. You all have access to the rest of the event if you want to or have time to stick around. You're absolutely welcome to. And in 2 hours, we'll be opening it up to group tables if people want to have discussions one-on-one or in a group. That's also available to you. So feel free if you want to stick around. We would love it. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you, Keisha, for your beautiful moderating and for all the thoughtful questions, and just huge appreciation to everyone for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you. So much love to you guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.